This place used to be well lit by the street lights. Remember that we spoke live here from this spot at 5 p.m. telling the whole world that these people are still peaceful, sitting on the floor and telling the whole world that they want their government to listen to them. And after that time, just few hours after that time, when it came into darkness, the street lights went off and some folks approached in uniform and opened fire. I'm gonna speak to one or two persons who were very close to some of the firing range and what they have to say. My brother, please can you come? Tell us what exactly happened. Speak up. Go ahead.
So we were protesting peacefully. After comedian AY approached us, he addressed us. There was nothing. We were still protesting peacefully without any violence at all. Immediately, the street lights, they went off. People started shooting at us. We were able to recognize them. They were putting on uniform. These were the military men, the soldiers. We were lying down, waving our flag, telling them they are protesting peacefully. But yet they refused. They were shooting directly at us. It wasn't to drive us away. It was to kill us.
Okay, I'm gonna let him stop there. I'm gonna bring someone else. This is live update, and all our equipment are away. We had to improvise these systems. You can see I have some. You can't see, but I have a lot of folks, friends here in front of me. Those who are protesting, and they're pointing their torch lights, phone lights on me to be able to illuminate this place. Look at this man, for instance. He's conveyed a few people to the hospital, and he's got blood stains all over him. I'm going to ask him to step out again. I'm bringing someone else again. Look at this man. This is part of the damages that are happening here at the Lekki Toll. Now, if you think that is not good enough, take a look at this. Take a look at this. Take a look at this.
That's bullets.
This is it.
Bullets.
These are evidences that people were shot. Earlier, we saw some pictures that we sent in of someone who was shot on the thigh. 2 people have been taken to hospital that we are aware of, but there are more than 9 persons are receiving treatment in various hospitals across this place. This is what is happening here at Lekki Toll. I have just a few minutes or few seconds to leave this place because we are now under a guarded area by some of these guys, and they assured me that I couldn't do this for more than 3 to 4 minutes.
Well, that is what we're focusing on today on the program. We've got 2 gentlemen joining us to talk about some of these things, if we could say shed light. We've got Senator Ita Enang, who is the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs, as well as Ebonlu Adegboro, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, who is also a member of the Judicial Panel of Inquiry for SARS, which was set up by inaugurated by the Governor of Lagos in Lagos. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the program.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you and good morning.
Well, Senator, let me start with you. Looking at those images and given the reactions the world over about some of these actions by our security agencies, can there ever be any credible explanation to what transpired last night, do you think?
It's been a very moody moment from the all over the country, and from the pictures streaming, from the pictures on the papers, from the pictures on the social media. It's been a moody and regrettable moment. And I want to assure that Nigerians are witnesses that the government has taken actions which have been reasonably and very reasonable in accommodating the questions and the issues raised by the Endsars protesters. And as the days progressed, there were other interventions by persons of less noble intent. So it became a question of finding a way of protecting the protesters and protecting the innocent citizens and property. And unfortunately, it has gotten to a situation which is now very regrettable. But I want to say, before I conclude on this, that as of today, His Excellency Mr. President has offered calming words. His Excellency the Vice President has openly apologized. The National Economic Council, made up of all the governors, have taken action setting up the panels of inquiry. the demands of the protesters, 5/5 on the of the Endsars protesters have been granted. SARS has been disbanded. Every other issue which could arise or which is a contention now, the officers of the government at different levels are available to address them. So I join my voice in appealing to all Nigerians that it is time to get off the road. It is time to, you still have a right to protest within the law, but it is time to come onto the table so that we can synthesize all the issues which are matters of complaint. It was said that the protests had no leaders, but we've been able to identify some of the leaders, and the leaders are very peaceful. Some civil society organizations have opted to sit on the table with us and discuss, and we are discussing with them. And but we offer our words of empathy, and we are working hard that the situation doesn't deteriorate, and this will be perhaps the last bloodshed.
Well, Mr. Adegboru, let me ask you something else that I wanted to ask you, but let me first of all ask you about those explanations that he has talked about. Do you think they suffice for now or at all? Do you think they are significant in the scheme of things, given what has happened?
Thank you very much. It's a sad day. I'm really heartbroken and crestfallen. Many of us didn't sleep. Watching the events, especially at the Lekki toll gate. And I think there's no explanation that we can offer than to sympathize with all those who have become victims of this brutality. Now, I believe that we've been watching the event, especially at the Lekki toll gate. It's been the most peaceful, it's been the most organized, it's been the most coordinated since the protests started. And we've not had a single incident of thuggery or violence from the Lekki Center in particular. And so it becomes very sad that that then turned out to be the center of violence unleashed on the protesters by the security agencies. Now, I believe that there are rules of engagement in respect of peaceful protests. At the time that the governor of Lagos State declared the curfew to commence by 4 p.m., many people protested that they were still in traffic and could not meet up with that deadline. So the curfew was then extended to 9 p.m. So as of the time that security men invaded the Lekki toll gate, the curfew was yet to commence. There was no reason whatsoever for their presence at that time. And even though they were present there, as desired by so many who were calling for peace, there was no reason to unleash live bullets on children who are holding only flag. They had nothing in their hands but the flag of their nation. And we kept hearing their voices saying, we don't want violence, don't kill us. So we are quite concerned about this, and I'm sure that in the course of time, people who are responsible for this must pay for it. And we will continue to appeal for peace, continue to urge Nigerians to embrace law and order, but most importantly is to engage the security agencies that it is not by shooting live bullets into peaceful protesters that you engage them. So I do not agree with my colleague here that there is a proportionate response, especially in respect of the Lekki toll gate. In other areas where police stations were being burnt, the responsibility of security agencies was to go to those areas and stop the violence. But since there was no report of violence at the Lekki toll gate, there's no justification for what we witnessed yesterday. But I'm glad that there's been some kind of directive from the governor of Lagos State that an investigation be conducted. We await the outcome of that investigation. And once we know exactly the true facts of the case, people who are responsible for this must be brought to justice. Thank you very much.
Can there be an explanation, Senator Enan? Can there be an explanation for giving what Mr. Adebura has said? There weren't reports of violence at the Lekki toll, but areas where there were reports of violence, Orile Agege, and a number of other parts of Lagos in particular, there was no deployment of security operatives. The prison break in Edo, there was no deployment of security operatives. So can there be significant or sufficient or commensurate explanation for the deployment of security operatives to a place of peaceful protest where there wasn't one single report of any act of violence?
Let me first of all, before I come to your question, say that contrary to what the learned senior advocate has said, I have not said on this program and at all, and it would be so unconscionable if anybody would, that there was proportionate response. Learned Silk, I did not, and I will never say that there was a proportionate response by the security agencies. And I want to say that given all the circumstances, I am not aware that there was there was a proportionate response, in my opinion, and a justification for a deployment. But I am not in a position to see or to say what the persons who may have been involved in the response saw or knew. So I will not. But what I want to say is that in the Edo situation, all acts and obedience to international law or rules relating to peaceful protest, including the constitution, were observed. And then there was a full prison break. His Excellency, the governor of Edo State, then decided to impose curfew, rightly. Then in Orile and all other places, there were no deployment of security, although there were burning down of police stations and so on. This goes to show that the government is very responsive and responsible in respect of handling the crisis thus far. If you come to thus far, accepting the situation at the Lekki toll gate. If you come to the situation in Abuja, at the Apo Mechanic Village and all those areas, there were protests. And persons, perhaps who may be of less noble intent, intervened and interfered. And it became a situation where the peaceful protesters were now being endangered. And in the course of it, government still felt, the security agencies still felt that they had a duty to make sure that both sides protected themselves. And that is when the situation degenerated into burning of cars, car lots, and attack and counter attacks. Only then did the security agencies go in to peacefully disperse the situation and take control. I'm not sure, I haven't heard of very gory incidents in the Abuja situation. You can also follow the situation that is happening along the airport, along the Kuje. The way the security agencies have handled it has been very noble, very constitutional, very respectful of the rights of citizens, and in accord with what the federal government and even the state governments are directed. We are impressed at the handling of the situation all over the country, and this single spill in Lekki has dampened and lowered our spirit and the spirit of the protest. So we still sympathize, empathize, and we still plead that please let God onto the table and sort out all the issues.
Well, Mr. Adegbero,
it cannot be justified. Okay. I will not justify it. We're all brothers and so on.
All right, but Mr.
And we are human beings. And these are lives of Nigerians and persons.
Hang on, Senator. Well, Mr. Adegbero, how do people come to the table with all of those panels of inquiry that has been said, looking at what transpired yesterday? Doesn't that throw the trust that they would have had or had with government out of the window with what has happened? How easy is your job going to be now?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I must say that this government is a product of protest. This particular government. If you recall what happened in 2015, the various efforts made to change the government, Nigerians supported the All Progressive Congress in all its efforts at claiming getting to power. Protests were organized in Kano, in prominent areas. When leaders of the party, which was in opposition then, were being harassed by security agencies, the court rose to their aid. I remember vividly that the present governor of Kaduna State, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, was to travel abroad and his passport was seized at the airport. He went to court. The court rose, condemned it, and issued a judgment with 50 million naira damages. So the point I'm making is this. It's not proper for that government having come to power to then be displaying symptoms of intolerance to protests. I agree that when the protest gets to a stage when properties and lives are in danger, the government, of course, would have to respond. But contrary to what my learned friend said, we have no evidence now that the response was targeted at those who are perpetrating violence. We don't have any single person who's been arrested by the security agencies to say, we caught you burning, we caught you looting. The response has been so far targeted at the protesters themselves, because the responsibility of the security agencies is to ensure that those who are trying to infiltrate the protesters are brought to book. They are arrested and stopped so that the protesters can be protected. But having said that, I think that as it is presently, the various panels of inquiry set up in the various states now have the opportunity to then also interrogate this system. Because if those panels are independent and the people there are not paid agents of the government and we are working as part-time members and we are not under any directive or pressure, we should be able to even investigate the government itself to know, for instance, whether the government is culpable and then be able to bring an independent report to the people of Nigeria. So, for instance, my continued presence in such panel will be to the extent that I'm allowed to even interrogate the activities that happened yesterday, whether the government itself is culpable. Because we saw images of some kind of premeditated event when people went to disconnect CCTV, and then when electricity was turned off rather, and then the shooting started. So these are things that gives us the opportunity to now interrogate and come out with objective analysis of the decision and inform Nigerians as to our findings. And that's why I was glad that the governor has already ordered an investigation into the events. We will visit the centers of activities. We will go around the toll gate itself and visit the hospitals. And then if we have evidence that indeed there's culpability on the part of the security agencies or even the government, we should be bold enough to tell Nigerians of what is our finding. And I'm glad that the Nigerian Bar Association, the African Bar Association, are already taking steps to file criminal charges against the security agencies, especially those who rain live bullets on the Lekki protesters. So we will abide by those steps taken by those professional organizations. So our job is actually made easier in the sense that now we must hold government accountable to say these panels are independent, and we must demand accountability in respect of those who are responsible for the for this event.
Well, Senator, it does appear as though the security agencies had done, their recce. They had taken positions. It was premeditated, because how do you explain, how did the lights, which you never go off in that particular area, the toll gate area, went off? Images of officials adorning those LCCI fatigue, LCC fatigue, going away with CCTV footage, which usually never goes off, unless, of course, something was going on just before this incident happened. How do you tell people this wasn't premeditated?
I am in Abuja, and right now I'm not holding brief for the security agencies. I am not privy to anything that they may have known or seen. I am not privy to any record. I'm not privy to any matter for which they may have caused or used to take any decision or whatever decision they took. My presence and my action now is still to offer calming, conciliatory words. I am not in any manner holding brief, because I can only hold brief if I am aware of any premeditated situation or the plans or the preparations or who did what. But let me also join my colleague, the learned senior advocate of Nigeria, to say that His Excellency the Governor of Lagos State has done what the federal government has directed, that set up commissions of inquiry, independent commissions of inquiry. And the Governor of Lagos State has already directed the inquiry, even independent of this commission of inquiry. And also highlight that too. The federal government on its own, through the National Human Rights Commission, has submitted lists and names of persons who may have been involved in prior acts, and they have submitted to the Attorney General of the Federation and called for their prosecution. Right now, the situation is to heal the wounds, calm the situation, restore life and Nigerians to the path of peaceful, normal protest, and again calling for coming to the table for the issues to be resolved and agreed on. I am not in any manner at all in the least justifying any act that leads to loss of life, whether by a government agency, whether by the protesters or the anti-protesters or any person. Life is sacrosanct, and we agree that every person, the protesters and the anti-protesters, have a right. And there is something we say in law. You have a right to point your fingers. But your right to point your fingers stops where the nose of another person begins.
All right,
the
Senator,
right of all parties must be protected at this time.
We'll come back to this in just a moment, Senator. We need to go to break.
Go along your path.
Just give us a moment.
Go along his path.
All right, give us a moment.
Ensure that
we will be back and continue our conversation, Senator. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Well, Senator, yes, you are in Abuja. The president is equally in Abuja. I mean, that's the seat of government. And the soldiers who went on, and by the way, we're getting reports that there are still shootings this morning in Lekki area, and there isn't any curfew now. So one wonders what is going on. But that aside, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Now, if the military are the ones shooting, shouldn't then it be said that the buck stops at his table? Could he have been the one issuing the order for the military to go on?
I will not say so, and I want to say again that I am not privy to the action of any of the security agencies in respect of the Lekki issues. And so I will want to be excused from answering questions relating to actions of the military as at now, which you say there is still shooting. One can only speak firmly on a matter that he is personally aware or privy to. Right now, I am not aware, and I am not. But I want to assure you that His Excellency Mr. President is a man of great humane heart, and he has taken every action that the president could take, and he is still taking more. He's consulted and called the Minister of Youth Development. The minister is intervening. He's working with the defense institutions, the Minister of Defense, the Chief of Defense Staff. He has given appropriate directives, and you could see that despite the carnage in Abuja, the president has not directed I'm sorry, Mr. President has not asked the military to intervene, and there has not been a disproportionate response by the police. I think it was only in the night that I heard that soldiers were deployed to somewhere in Apo, where there were, according to the video I've seen from the station here, interventions and protestations and interactions which were almost degenerating into conflict, which would have gotten more higher. Of course, 2 days ago,
let me just put this in, Senator.
Of the
before you, let me add this to your response, so you can equally respond to this. You've been a member of the House of Representatives. You've been a senator. You are currently an advisor to the president on Niger Delta affairs. You've got a lot of experience in that regard. Can the military embark on any activity whatsoever, such as this one, without the president signing off?
I still will say that it will be inappropriate for me to respond to that, because I am not aware personally that the military have been deployed there.
Senator, you just spoke about the military, the pictures you spoke of, you saw in Abuja.
That I'm advisor to the president on a matter, and I am not personally aware of the deployment, so it will not be appropriate for me to respond to it. But all I'm aware is that there is every effort to get the police to ensure that the rights of citizens to protest.
Yeah, but Senator, I'm not asking you. I'm not asking you if the president deployed them. I'm asking you, as an experienced lawmaker, can the commander-in-chief or can the army go on such assignments without the commander-in-chief signing off?
I want to say that I want to say that it is the chief of army staff or the minister of defense or the chief of defense staff that could, for now, respond to that, because otherwise it will be I will be embarking on a frolic on a matter that I am not personally aware.
All right, having seen the shootings that went on in Lekki, Lagos yesterday, as an advisor, did you or could you have advised the president to speak to the country since his citizens were being killed yesterday?
Mr. President has made a lot of responses and is still going to make more responses on this matter. And he deems it as he deems it appropriate, and he is working towards it. He is walking through all the officers of government, and he has taken more action and is going to take more action. And it will not be appropriate to say what next action he will take. But Mr. President empathizes with the whole situation, and you'll hear more of His Excellency's actions.
Has there been any comments from Mr. President about the shootings in Lekki last night?
As of today, it happened yesterday night, and we're just waking up, trying to address the situation, and you'll hear more.
In other words, there's been none. Well, okay, Mr. Adegborowa. Okay, Mr. Adegborowa, I mean, as a lawyer then, and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the buck stops at the table. He gives the directive. So, from the point of law and from your perspective, do you think that the army can embark on such without the president signing off on it?
Well, for clarity purposes, the president and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces is directly responsible for the activities, for the deployment of military men, including the police, soldiers, the Navy, and the Air Force. So the buck stops at the table of the president, and it takes responsibility for the actions of all security forces in the country. You remember that for a long time we've been making agitations for restructuring and devolution of power. We've been calling for state police. We've been asking that the chief security officers of the various states, that's the governors, be allowed some measure of independence in the way they control security within their territory. And this has not worked. So as we speak today, Under the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the president is the one responsible for all security activities and security agencies. But of course, I must make the point also that it's a balancing act, because we must also take into consideration the responsibility of the president to maintain law and order, to protect lives and property. So to that extent, it's a very delicate decision on the part of the president, because as of yesterday morning, the events that happened in Edo State, the ones that happened in Orile, the ones that are happening in other parts of the country, genuine people were already feeling concerned about how that will go on without some kind of intervention. And that's why it's painful that the Lekki thing is happening, because that has been the most peaceful and the most coordinated. So our expectation was that the deployment of security agencies would be to these areas where there were reports of violence, there were reports of destruction of lives and property. So to that extent, every reasonable person would have supported the president in trying to quell those violence and destruction of property. But as to what happened in Lekki, I cannot find any justification. I cannot find any defense for it whatsoever. But having said that, I think it's also important to appeal to the Endsars protesters. You see, because we would find some balance in ensuring that we continue to maintain peace, in ensuring that we'll continue to maintain some organized form of protest in such a way that it is not hijacked by hoodlums and also taken over by persons who have other intentions other than the protesters themselves. So I must appeal at this stage that we must maintain some kind of balance in ensuring that reasonably the situation does not deteriorate. And that also will make the protesters and the security agencies have some kind of understanding and balance. Now, if a curfew is declared, it is already a lawful directive in that regard. And being citizens who obey law and order, we should respect such declaration. But if people protest the declaration of curfew, the response then will not be to kill them. It will be probably to arrest and then take necessary measures to ensure that law is brought in that regard. But surely there's no justification for the shooting anyway. And the president is to be held responsible in that regard, being the one in charge of the military.
Well, given what is happening at Lekki now, where, as you heard earlier, protesters are, still there, it would seem, on the one hand, that communicating to them that the curfew is on and consequently protesters shouldn't be out is perhaps faulty. In that regard, who should be doing what?
Well, I think that there's a lot of expectation on the part of the government in terms of information. Like I explained to you earlier, when the governor of Lagos State gave the directive for curfew to commence by 4 p.m., there were protests from Lagosians who were still stuck in traffic. And the governor extended the curfew to 9 p.m. as of yesterday. So there's a need for proper information on the part of government to the citizens, such that we do not have ourselves in this default situation where people are already trapped. So I think what I would suggest as of this morning, therefore, is that the security agencies should not arrest anybody for breaching the regulation concerning curfew, because there's a lot of confusion in that regard. But at the same time, the protesters themselves should be lawful and respect all lawful directives from the government by withdrawing from the streets if a curfew has already been imposed. That is important, that there must be a balance between the protesters and the security agencies.
Well, permit me to refer you to something you said earlier, Mr. Adegboruwa, when you said that this government itself is a product of protests. Dare I say that the entire Fourth Republic is a product of protests. I mean, you remember what happened in 1993
1993 when the annulment of the June 12 elections took off, and then of course protests followed and all of that. If you can draw a comparison, what are the lessons that we learned or did not learn then that are playing out now? And what should we be doing different from what we did then so we do not get the same result?
Thank you very much. For every protest, there must be coordination. There must be leadership. And that's the difference between what happened in the June 12 protest and what's going on now. At the period when we resisted the annulment of the June 12 election, we had Campaign for Democracy, headed by Dr. Beko Ransom-Kuti and also Comrade Chima Obani as secretary. And so we had the capacity to appreciate the situations. We had demands. We had an agenda. And at the time when it became clear that we could not sustain a peaceful protest for a long time, we directed our people to withdraw and embark on sit-at-home protests. So in every circumstance, there must be some kind of leadership appraiser, you know, for every situation of this nature. And at that time, we didn't have social media. And so what we did was to coordinate between us and other labor organizations and civil society organizations, but there was a clear direction on what we wanted and how we wanted it. We knew it was going to be a sustained struggle at that time. But in the present one, I think what will appeal to the Endsars protesters is that there are demands that have been stated already. And those demands are known, the 5-point demands. And now one of the consequences of response to that demand is the various panels of inquiry set up in the various states. My own counsel, therefore, would be that since those panels were set up to investigate brutality, we should then include the events that happened between yesterday in all parts of the country, and then beam the searchlight on the perpetrators of those events between thugs, between the security agencies, and be able to come up with independent assessment, just like the Human Rights Council has done in recommending certain policemen for prosecution and then also paying compensation to some victims. But we cannot advocate a situation of continued confrontation between peaceful protesters and armed security agencies. Yeah. And so that's why I sounded the note of advice to protesters for now to obey the curfew in the various states where curfew has been imposed, so that we can then also retreat and appraise the situation correctly in order to sustain law and order in the system.
But Mr. Adeboruwa, one of the things a number of people will also bring to you on this matter is that back then, as you said, there were plans, there was leadership, and it produced this Fourth Republic that so many people are still questioning. Some also say that many of the people who are benefiting from the Fourth Republic now, they weren't part of the struggle at that time. So going forward, well, we're probably not drawing conclusions yet, but in another 10 years, what would be the takeaway? This is 20 years or more than 20 years after that protest that you talked about that lasted 5 years. In another 10 years, 20 years from now, what will we say about this if, you know, we don't do differently? Or what do you expect us to do if we're going to get a different result in another 20 years?
Thank you. I think what we can get as a kind of political capital from this is that our people have become enlightened, the youth have woken up, and they now have the destiny of this nation in their hands. We made a mistake at the time in 1993. The understanding then, as we were all told by our leader, Pa Abraham Adesanya, Chief Gani Fawemi, was that we should not partake in politics. You know, so many of us who had the opportunity to take charge of the situation in 1998, the impression we gave them was that politics was dirty and we were revolutionaries who should not get involved in political power. But the lesson we can learn from this now is that the youth should take over. There's no reason why in the coming elections, in the by-elections, in all the subsequent elections that are going to come up, the youth should form their own political party and directly take charge of the voting pattern such that they can produce their own representatives, they can produce their own leaders. They should take take over the activities of the political parties and ensure that institutions of democracy, such as INEC, are indeed independent, so that their votes will produce their leaders. So I see that in another 5 years, in another 10 years, we shouldn't have a situation whereby we keep repackaging the old generation. If you say that it's good for youth to take over power, and in all the cabinets, virtually, there are still the same names that we hear now and then. So they shouldn't just see this as just Endsars. They should translate this protest into political gain by taking over the reins of power, by also then extending it to demand for true federalism. Because the challenge you have is that if we allow this to go, we go back to the unity system, whereby in a nation of 37 federating units, the 36 states and the federal capital, only the federal government has capacity to respond to any situation, because anything that brings resources in the country today is within the power of the federal government. So the youth should insist on restructuring. They should insist on fiscal federalism. They should insist on devolution of powers, so that matters relating to security, electricity, can then go back to the regions, and the regions will be allowed to develop according to their capacity. So it shouldn't just be a matter of Endsars protest. It should then translate into political power and a true restructuring of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Well, Senator, that in consideration of the capacity of the federal government to respond to such matters, there are so many questions about their response to it. I mean, yesterday, even today, there are several images about men who are perceived to be secret police. You see the kind of vehicles they use, the kind of attire they usually go about with, organizing thugs to attack peaceful protesters. I mean, these days, even this morning, you can't open my socials without, they're inundated. We are inundated with images of Nigerian flag drenched with the blood and lifeless bodies of Nigerians who they say have been shot at even up until this morning. So they ask, look, the response of the president, they say, leaves a lot to be desired, because they say, look, they had news yesterday that the president met with the Minister of Defense, with the Chief of Defense Staff, and they don't have any pointed response from the president. So one wonders, what kind of response is it then going to give that will placate or undo what has happened?
Well, thank you very much. You know that the president works, one, in person, and two, through his ministers, and three, first through himself, the vice president, his ministers, advisors, and other persons. There are more of these things that he doesn't do alone. And the president doesn't come out and talk at every moment and every point in time. He gives instructions and it is gone down, and it goes down. Let me say that those pictures I have seen are depressing. They are incensing. They are not comfortable. They are less than noble. But I want to plead with Nigerians, adding the voice or joining my colleague and all Nigerians, that please, it is time for us to come to the table. The table has been created in every state. There is a table before every minister, every officer of government. There are civil society organizations are volunteering to mediate on behalf between the governmental institutions and the protesters to bring up coordinated demands. All the demands they made and the Endsars have been accommodated. The other ones which are now multiplying and increasing are being accommodated. The government takes and accepts that it is not the boss, that we, from the president down, we're all servants of the people. We are not masters of the people. We obey your voice. We carry we carry responsibility for you. We do what you've commanded us. We do what you voted us to do. Anything that we do which is less than noble, please draw attention. I think this is one occasion that I have seen all leaders, from the president, vice president, governors, and so on, coming to being very humane in addressing every situation. I want to assure you that within the days that come, you will see the actions that comes from the presidency, and Nigerians will be satisfied. But please, the most important thing is, let's come to the table. Two, let us obey any lawful order as to curfew. 3, let us know that while you protest, the police will be protecting you. If in the course of protecting you, other people come to want to interfere with you, in the course of them, a fight or some other thing may ensue, some danger may occur to either the security agency or to the protesters or to the anti-protesters. It is time to come to the table. I also want to say that I have seen pictures and video of persons with Prado Jeep, with Toyota vehicles, other Toyota Hilux vehicles or so on, carrying people. I haven't seen where those people were dropped. I cannot say where they were taken to. I cannot say who the officers, who those people who carried people were. There were just captions by persons who took those pictures of what they thought it was. I want to say that yes, it is the age of social media, but we should be very wary of what we receive, what we see, and what we believe. Every action of every person.
Senator,
now
let me bring this in as we wind down now. So, at the moment, I mean, you're still the advisor to the president on Niger Delta affairs. So many expect naturally you should be in touch with the president as his advisor. And there are several questions making the rounds, even up until this morning. Is the president in the country?
Sorry?
Is the president in the country at the moment?
That the president is in the country and the president is taking action, and he's even still taking action. You are aware, we are all aware, and Mr. President is on top of the situation. He's receiving briefs, he's giving out instructions, and he is speaking. I'm sure over the weekend, it was a Sunday, you saw him invite the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. On Saturday, he did the same thing with another set of people. On Monday, he did the same thing. Yesterday, he did the same thing with other sets of people. Other pre-engagements were cancelled, rescheduled, for him to for more attention to be given to this situation. We, the President and the Presidency, has shown the highest level of responsibility in handling this matter. Where there is a spill, it is being corrected and it will be addressed, and you will not have it again. And whatever Nigerians are angry about are going to be addressed. We agree that this government is a product of protest. We will not, the government will not, the governors will not, the president and the presidency will not, the vice president will not. The vice president is a hard fighter for human rights.
All right, Senator.
You have his records in court.
Well, at the moment, Senator,
in court,
even in light of all that you say,
as Attorney General of Lagos State,
yeah, even in light of all that you say the president has done, even in light of all you say the president has done, he hasn't spoken about the lives of those who have been cut down in Lekki yesterday, because that is the chief responsibility of why he was elected, to protect lives and property. Many are waiting to see what will he say. Why hasn't he spoken, having done all those meetings you spoke about yesterday? Well, this is how far we can go today. We have to thank both of you, Senator Itai Enang, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs, Special Advisor, and then who also have had Ebun Oluwadegberowa, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and a member of that judicial panel of inquiry inaugurated by the Lagos State Governor, which he says is independent, and they are out there to do a job. Thank you both for talking to us this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.